Have we got more than the equity minimum? Can we leave?
This is what we were hoping that we had.
Oh, God.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome. It's my great pleasure this afternoon to introduce you to somebody, well, in fact, two people you may know already a little. Elizabeth Morgan, a polymath, short story writer, playwright, novelist, actress, director, journalist, and author of the book we're going to talk about this afternoon, which is Ticket to Paradise, the Welsh Emigration to Patagonia. And alongside her, Richard Harrington, star of stage and screen, most recently of Poldark and the world-conquering Hinterland. We're going to give you a little taste of it to start off with. So, the emigration to Patagonia begins 150 years ago this year, and yep. Elizabeth, you've written about it. Would you like to introduce the book first, or were you going to give us a reading?
Well, yes, it's based on historical fact, because I'm a great believer in if you're going to write anything historical, you've got to get it right. It's no good making it up. But the families are fiction. What happened to them is fact. I was first introduced to Patagonia when I was in the grammar school in Rhyl, in North Wales, and a girl from Patagonia arrived, this exotic creature who could only speak Welsh and Spanish. And I remember she did her GCSEs in Welsh, and she was older than we were, but, you know, gawping, this girl who could do these two languages, which is so unusual, you know. So that started off my interest in Patagonia. And then the interest developed, and I heard about emigration, the emigration to Patagonia, and so there, the research started.
And the story we follow, Myfanwy and David, we follow the Rees family, essentially, on their odyssey from the valleys in 1865. Yeah. Can you give us an impression of what it was that they were leaving behind?
Well, they were leaving behind a pretty arduous life, with death at every corner, children working in the mines and working the tin and the iron. And it was hardly a life that was conducive to ease of living. Not only were the wages almost non-existent, but there were certain punitive things that had been laws that had been issued by the government in Westminster. It was the prohibition of speaking Welsh at all. That was difficult. And my own grandmother suffered that, having the Welsh knot, which is a slate, with a rope tied around her neck when she was a little girl of 5. She never spoke English very well anyway, but that was one of the things. And the other thing was interesting, that you can see why there was a rise of nonconformity as well within the religious circles, because that gave an opportunity to speak the language. It gave an opportunity to actually air their own grievances and problems in their own language as well. And if they had, if they were found by the rent collector, because most of them were tenant farmers or whatever, if it was found that they'd gone to the chapel instead of the Church of England, which was being imposed, then often their rents were put up. Now, this became an impossible burden to bear for many, many. And that was probably one of the reasons why there was this urge to emigrate, really, you know.
And the way you tell it, the story of what lay beyond the sea and the possibilities of Patagonia came to them through the chapel. Is that right?
Well, certainly the Welsh Emigration Society at this point was fundamental in that, in spreading the word and spreading the information, the literature. Not always true, bit colourful, but nevertheless, you know, it gave them the idea of paradise was just across the water, that sort of thing. And, I mean, I had relatives, and maybe you did too, and many of us here had, who went to America. I mean, a lot of them left my hometown, Llanelli. A lot of them left Llanelli to show the Americans how to make tin or steel to Pittsburgh. And they went there. And the slate workers from the north as well went to to show them how to do it, or whatever. But the Welsh Emigration Society, well, you know, it was a funny organization, really, because you never knew whether it was going to be for territorial gain, whether the Welsh thought the Emigration Society were beginning to build empires, and you wondered, well, you know, they're going away from one big empire, they're going to build another empire. But they definitely wanted autonomy. That was the sort of cornerstone of the Emigration Society.
To illustrate what they were leaving behind, would you want to give your first reading on, is that the pit accident?
Oh, well, yes.
Yeah, should we do that?
Okay, I'll do that.
You need to hear this, ladies and gentlemen. So.
Okay, I'll do that then. I don't need my glasses, I've got big writing.
There we go.
I've got big writing.
Yeah, you're done.
Myfanwy decided to make a start on the weekly baking, knowing it would take her mind off tomorrow when the 4 adults would be meeting to finally decide, although it seemed to Myfanwy David's mind was already made up. The fire was hot, so she opened the kitchen door for some fresh air. The wind was coming from the east, blowing autumn through the valley. She fancied she heard a pit siren, but sound never carried accurately up the mountain, especially when the wind blew. Minutes later, clogs clattered into the yard. A perfunctory thump on the kitchen door, and 2 farm neighbors, women from further down the valley, stood in the doorway. There was no need for words. Myfanwy's throat tightened as she recalled the sickening sound she had heard. Accident down the Llys Fawr. The fearful words, breathless, half-sobbed, pierced Myfanwy's stomach like a knife. The second woman, a softly spoken widow, a look of terror on her face, said, "My Bryn is with you at Thomas and Rhiannon's boy. They've got to fetch her. It's on the lower level, they are." A grim, silent crowd had already gathered at the pit head. Whispered rumors about the size of the explosion and where it had taken place were already flying. "Gas at pit bottom," one of the managers said. Rescue teams had been sent down, but so far no one had surfaced. The crowd grew. As news spread through the town, fear like a freezing band clutched the heart and curdled the stomach. Older women, pregnant women, women with dishcloths still in their hands, and old men who remembered, huddled together. Some muttered prayers, but nowhere was a voice more than a whisper, lest the slightest vibration of sound or movement should disturb the already shattered honeycombs of underground galleries. Myfanwy and Rhiannon stood together, shawls pulled about tightly around their shoulders. It was colder now and beginning to rain. The wind, soughing through the trees, swirled clusters of dead leaves about the feet of families in torment, waiting, staring unblinking at the motionless wheel, preparing themselves for the ghastly hauls that they knew would be discharged before their eyes. David arrived with Glyn. They all embraced silently and stood, hand gripping hand. There was nothing to say. There were no words of comfort that could calm the agony of watching and waiting for the slightest shudder of that wheel. This was the new way of living and dying in a once pastoral landscape. And there was no turning back. Suddenly, the wheel jolted into life. The cage rose from the scorched underworld and shivered to a standstill. there was a moment of utter silence. Even the breeze held its breath. Slowly, rescue workers carried the recognizable dead on stretchers and placed them side by side. Some were limbless and horribly gashed. All were drenched in the color of the earth's black bowels. One by one, the corpses were claimed. A young pregnant woman fainted. Another, sobbing, cradled her beloved in her arms. An old man stood helpless by the body of his son. "Oh, my boy, he repeated, as tears filled the runnels of his wrinkled cheeks. 40 bodies lay waiting to be taken off to the makeshift mortuary. 40 homes had been destroyed, and love lay in pieces. 2 long hours passed. Wind and rain biting into the numbed living, waiting still as stone, willing the motionless wheel to spring into life. The injured had been taken off to the local hospital. Thomas and Hugh were not among them. Mavanwi was preparing herself to accept the certainty that Thomas was dead. A manager with red eyes and black with grime stood on a raised mound of slag facing the families. In his hand, he held a piece of paper. The list by year of those still down. His voice was barely audible. No chance. They had no chance at all. He drew a black hand across his cheek and read out names. His own son was one of them. Thomas, Hugh, and several other youngsters were not. Frantic parents exchanged glances, and as he returned to the hut, David and Glyn caught the manager. "Our boys," David asked. "In God's name, where are our boys?" "All accounted for now. Sorry. Glyn flared. "But they've got to be there somewhere." The manager shook his head. They weren't on pit bottom for sure. New North Seam Level 2 started today. I think some of the children were drafted down there. "So where are they then?" David demanded. "They haven't been brought up. They're still searching, they are. There's been a bit of a fall there too, but no casualties." "Gas. What about gas?" Glyn asked the question, dreading the answer. The manager threw up his hands in despair. I don't know. He was on the point of tears. "Then get us a list, will you? Please." David could see the enormous strain the man was under. "Impossible. Sean Lewis, only one in charge of level 2, and he went down to pit bottom halfway through the shift. He took my boy with him." Tears streaked down the blackened cheeks. David put his arm around the distraught manager's shoulder in a silent human gesture of understanding. He turned away from them and stumbled back into the hut, weeping as he went. Everyone waiting at the pit head knew that after so many hours of incarceration, the smallest gas leak could have disastrous consequences. Another hour passed. Then slowly, the wheel trembled. An audible gasp could be heard as tension among the waiting families reached breaking point. The cage, like a lumbering beast, rose to the surface and stopped with a judder. There was no sound from anyone. With each silent second, desperate parents prepared themselves to claim a small, blackened corpse. The cage door groaned open, and children, still in shock, stood blinking in the dusky light, half afraid to step into the world they had left hours before. Glyn shouted, "Hugh! More names followed, and out they tumbled, little girls and boys stunned, some crying, all in shock, as they were swept into the arms of weeping parents who rushed to envelop this most precious delivery. Thomas and Hugh staggered from the lift, supporting each other. It was nothing less than a resurrection. Vanwie gathered her lost boy to her body, his black face wet with tears.
So Elizabeth, when you describe it like that, you can see why they had to go, or at least your family, your characters had to go. But still, what was being promised them was so vague, and what they had to do to achieve it was so enormous. It was a series of no returns. So the road to Bala, that's it, in fact. They've lost it at that point. They can't go back.
No, they can't, because what they did was, David was a smallholder, and he'd sold up what livestock he had. He had a few sheep, and he had one heifer. He'd sold it. And they'd given up the tenancy of the house and everything else, you know. No, the key was still staying there. Grandfather was still staying there. So they kept that on. But they'd given everything up. They sold everything they had. They were told to take farm implements to the Argentine, to Patagonia. And they did. They collected it all together. And it was this, for my family in the book, that actually was the last straw. Because David was devoted to his little girl, Bethan. And, you know, at some point, Bethan would be working the iron. She'd have to go and work. Unless, of course, Thomas was old enough to run the small holding. That was it. It was a question of, you know, balancing things up. But they really had to go. And there were families like them who had to go. So it wasn't just the language. It wasn't just the fervour to go and start a new colony, although this is what my family wanted to do, because many of these families had emigrated before, and as David says in the book, they go there thinking they're going to keep to themselves. But of course, we know that emigration is okay, but there has to be integration as well, which of course, and this was unusual in the fact that they'd been promised autonomy. You see, so you're right. I mean, they had nothing left. They could not go back.
And could you tell us a bit about what they were promised, what they thought they were going to get?
Well, they were promised a lot of stuff they did get. They did get 100 acres each. They did get animals. They did get livestock. And they did get rescued when things went wrong. But they were promised luscious green fields, and what they were going to was a barren, uninhabited country. And what they didn't know was that really, I mean, the Argentine, to be fair to the Argentine, it has to be, because they rescued the Welsh every time. They were in a difficult situation. They were in a new country. They were only 50 years old when the Welsh went there. And that meant that they had to secure their borders. A massive long, if you look at the map, massive long border with Chile. And the Chileans could just walk in. And they were very, very, very aware and scared of being taken over. They just got rid of the Spaniards. After all, they didn't want Chileans taking them over as well. So to have somebody, to have people beginning a community there in bordering on Chile was great. And that's what they wanted. There were Indians. The Welsh hadn't been told about the Indians there as well. But, you know, they hadn't been told. But fortunately, the Indians they met were nice ones, the Tehuelches. They were great, and there was a great commerce and intercommunication between the Welsh and the Tehuelches. And they were very, very nice people. They were the Patagons, the ones with the big feet, you know. Patagones. Yeah.
So the actual information the settlers had was they took it almost entirely on trust, because they could have known very, very little, and it was all about what the Welsh Immigration Society promised them.
Absolutely.
And you dramatise what happens to them in Liverpool.
They got to Liverpool and no ship, the one they'd been promised. They were kept waiting a long, long time. Money'd run out. They were innocence in a large city. Imagine it, a sheep farmer going to play his violin to get some pennies. He gets bashed up. Well, you know, that was the city life for you. They weren't used to it. They just were not used to it at all.
Richard Harrington is going to show us more or less what happened.
Yes.
Here goes your book.
Yes.
There's no North Walians in the audience, I hope. Oh, God. David was ushered into the back office, simply furnished with pictures of ships and a large map of the world completely covering the third wall. On a bureau were several bottles of rum and whiskey, with accompanying tumblers. In front of a bow window was a carved black armchair and the biggest desk David had ever seen. The door opened, and in strode Captain Vaughan. By any standards, he was a big man, but for a Welshman, he was a giant. 6'4", with a broad frame, bushy black beard and eyebrows, he looked capable of building an entire navy single-handed. David perceived a twinkling warmth beneath this intimidating exterior. "So how may I help you?" His voice boomed with the accents of North Wales, with which David was not too familiar, or me by the sounds of it. "The Halton Castle, your ship, sir, is it not?" "Correct." There was no time to be less than blunt. "Then where is it, Captain Vaughan?" The big man sat down heavily behind his desk and nodded briefly in the direction of a chair at David's side. "Sit down, Mr. Rees." He took a long ruler and pointed to the map of the world. "Somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. She's about there." The ruler came to rest just south of Ceylon. David was too stunned to speak. The implications were shocking. They had been duped. "But it could take weeks, sir. We have already been in Liverpool 26 days, summoned here in the first instance to sail aboard your ship on May the 3rd. We have paid up our life savings, sir. So where is that money, Captain Vaughan? Where is it?" "Calm down, Mr. Rees," said the big man quietly. He rose and stood at the window, his black eyes darting between David and the sea. "Your money is safe, but it's not with me." David was about to question this second revelation, but Vaughan continued, "It is with Reverend Mr. Jones." "But why?" "Because I refuse to take it." His words came like a punch in the solar plexus. "What? Do you want the truth, sir?" Palms sweating, throat dry, voice paralyzed, David gave a perfunctory nod. Vaughan looked at the man sitting before him. Good, strong, honest, nobody's fool. He deserved no less than the truth. "Very well. I shall not mince my words, Mr. Rees. What I am about to say may come as a surprise." David sat rigid, waiting. "I have been a sailor all my life. I know the world, its rogues, its saints." He smiled. "I know where to find paradise on earth, where melons are as large as pumpkins and where grapes are as round as oranges, where olive-skinned people gather their daily sustenance with as much ease as we hold out our hands to catch a raindrop, where young women weave garlands of bougainvillea or oleander blossoms to adorn their bodies and hair, where the men find fish aplenty in the azure sea and lithe, slender women splash in lagoons of crystal blue, breasts like ripe lemons. Carried away by memory, his eyes embraced the sea. Jolting back to the present, he added sharply, "But I have seen places where the devil himself would not care to loiter." David could not quite comprehend the point of this peroration. "I can understand," Vaughan continued, "why our working people wish to emigrate. Our far-flung empire is in need of our own countrymen to work and to govern. Each week, from this very dock, my ships carry them away in their hundreds. America, Australia, Van Diemen's Land, South America." Still utterly perplexed, David could do nothing but listen. There was more to follow, that was obvious. The captain leant on the desk. "Something else you do not know." David felt a lump of lead settle in the pit of his stomach. His mind raced, not knowing how to react to these appalling new revelations. 6 months ago, Vaughan continued, the Reverend Mr. Jones wished to charter an emigration ship for you. I agreed until I was told the destination of my ship. Not America, not Australia, not South Africa, but, He paused, cheeks livid with anger. But Patagonia! He spat out the word. And that fellow Jones knew nothing of that God-forsaken continent. I asked him to show me paper, these premises made by the Argentinian government. There is nothing written, he shouted. They are mealy-mouthed promises, Mr. Rees, and their government changes its mind like a woman every few weeks. David's heart pounded. This could be the end for all of them. But, sir, he countered, we were given written assurances by the Welsh Immigration Society. Poppycock! Vaughan boomed. Absolute poppycock. With trembling hand, David drew out his pocket a folded leaflet on which these promises were clearly written and handed to the captain. Lies, Mr. Rees, Vaughan snorted. And I have told him so. But men have been sent out, sir, to see the quality of the land, its climate. We have promises, sir, of autonomy from the Argentinian government. Vaughan could see David Rees was a desperate man. He wished with all his heart he could put Jones before the emigrants. He would need wings and God to get out of that one. Mr. Rees, I give your autonomy 2 years. Look, the Argentine government wants that wild land tamed. You are ideal fodder. They want to colonize like Jones and his cronies. They want to protect the Argentine from any Chilean aggression. And David rose from his chair, ashen-faced and in despair. I'm not sure I want to hear any more, sir, he mumbled. For his part, Vaughan was aggrieved that he should have to explain the truth to this good fellow who had put his trust in idiots. He sighed. So what did they tell you? That the climate was extremely fine, that the soil was rich. We have all taken farm implements at their request, and each household should be given dairy and farm animals, plus a generous acreage of land. Furthermore, Vaughan interrupted, I know that coastline. A good friend was an officer on the Beagle with Charles Darwin. You've heard of him, I suppose? Oh, yes, sir, the atheist. Believes we come from apes, does he not? Morris snarled. In the case of the Welsh Emigration Society, I believe that theory to be indisputable. They did not tell you of the hundreds upon hundreds of arid miles where man and beast can disappear, never to be found again. Of the lashing storms along a barren coastline. David stood quite still and said not a word. An earthly paradise, they promised, eh? Kind of, sir, kind of. The captain sat down again. Well, this is one paradise to which I categorically refuse to transport my countrymen. Convicts, perhaps. My own kith and king, never. But our money, Captain Vaughan, the money we've paid up, nothing left for most of us, nothing. At this very moment, the Reverend Mr. is fitting up a tea clipper, using his wife's inheritance, I believe. A good woman, not like him. He turned to look at the sea. We had a very angry exchange here in this very room. I take it you refused again, sir. I did indeed, Mr. Rees. David was in a hopeless situation. He was now party to a vital disclosure, which should have been in confidence and yet had to be there or there would be a riot. Do you know anything more about the ship, Captain Vaughan? I mean, how long do you think it will take to get her fitted up? David had to give them some positive news. Maybe ready in a few more days. He has a captain and crew, not any of mine, but they are capable enough. David turned to leave. Well, thank you for your time, Captain Vaughan. Don't thank me for shattering your dreams, but I had to tell you. Of course, but I'm very perplexed. I have a responsibility to the group. Hard to know what to say to them. The big man sighed. Tell the men if they want to know anything about Patagonia, they can ask me. I'll be here for the next couple of weeks. Vaughan smiled wearily. Perhaps even Patagonia will be better than the life you have left, eh? David, his head lowered like a wounded animal, his face creased with worry, looked at the captain. My children in coal and iron, my son nearly killed last year. Then it will be better, Mr. Rees. The captain shook his head. Forgive me. I wish I could have taken you to a ready-made paradise, that's all. His voice was gentle now. David shrugged, exhausted and sick with worry. We wouldn't know what to make of an easy life, sir. Vaughan cupped David's hand in his. You are a good man, and may God bless you. With door ajar, David asked, the tea clipper, Captain, would you know her name? Be nice to give them a name. real evidence, you know. The mimosa, I believe. Yes, that's it. The mimosa.
Wow. So off they go. And everything in one just wishes that they wouldn't in a way, but they're committed. And part of the thing that takes them there, perhaps the key thing that takes them there, is the idea of a place where they can practice their own language and culture.
Yes, but it's interesting that I have a friend here in this hall at the minute who sent me a letter written by a relative of hers who'd gone to Patagonia, and it was written, a letter home, in the most beautiful English. I mean, it was extraordinary. So I do believe that a lot of them were bilingual, and in fact, I have heard that there were some people from Liverpool who went as well. They were Welsh, but they were Liverpool, so they were not Welsh speaking, so they went as well. But I think that it was to get, I mean, you know, it was tempting, a land where you were given all this acreage without punishment for doing what you wanted to do. And, you know, they were idealists as well, political idealists, you know. Of course, I've made David into a political idealist, haven't I? But they were, because women having the vote, 1865, come on, you know. It was many years later that we did, but that was it. And there was going to be a real equality there. And of course, I've given David the concept of having a Senate and a governing group like the French, like the French had their revolution, and so he was a political animal, and that was in his head, you know. That was David.
So considering the conditions, what they actually succeeded in doing with the help of the locals was extraordinary, wasn't it?
Well, enormous. I mean, what they did, the Welshis, first of all, they were the ones who helped them. They showed them, I mean, it was interesting, they showed them how to make windows. There was no glass, but they made windows with the linings of the rear stomach lining. The rears were the ostrich-like creatures, and the stomach lining was very fine, and so they used those for windows. And they showed them how to use the bolas to capture the animals so they could eat. Otherwise, it was fishing. They ate a lot of fish, but they could do that. And to ride, that was the thing as well. They became very fine horsemen, you know. So they had to learn an awful lot. It was an incredibly difficult learning curve. Imagine it, a miner going there and suddenly having to ride on horseback, bolas and everything else. It was wild country, you know. They were remarkable people. It was Wales's Wild West. It was, really, yeah.
So they construct this society that functions, they're able to feed themselves, and they get tremendous help, actually, or crucial help from the Argentine government, who just about keep them alive and more.
Absolutely, yes, because what they didn't reckon on was the lack of moisture in the soil. It was dry. It was all right by the river, fine, that was okay. And it was a woman, I've made it in the Vanway, of course, she was my heroine. It was a woman who said, why don't we dig little canals from the river and let the river spread into our fields, which is what they did, and that was their first irrigation. And after that, the wheat grew. In fact, it grew so well, they had a prize.
Yes.
Yes, they had a prize for the best wheat. Yes, yes. A few years later, but they had floods.
Yeah.
Terrible, terrible floods. I mean, they were just monstrous. No, but the Buenos Aires helped them out every time. And that was another thing, you know, integration.
So the price for this help was, first of all, there was sort of a garrison of Spanish soldiers, and then Spanish would be taught.
Yes.
And it crept on and on, didn't it? Can you talk about what the Argentinian government's agenda was?
Well, the Welsh did some, the boys did something a bit antagonistic, I suppose, towards the Argentinians. They were having a ceremony to commemorate their first township. They called it Rawson, after Senor Rawson, who was the Minister of the Interior, who was very friendly and liked the Welsh and wanted them to be there. Nice man, good man. But they thought they were going to have the Welsh flag, but it was the Argentinian flag that went up. And the lads pulled it down and put a Welsh flag up instead, but they had to pull that down too. So in the end, they had the two flags together. But the army came in, and the Welsh were absolutely horrified because they were because they were having to do army drill on a Sunday. And as one of them said, well, you can't even cut your toenails on a Sunday, yeah? So, you know, it was a bit much to get the army drill on a Sunday, too much. So, but actually, some of the boys quite liked it, I think. They enjoyed it. It was a bit of a change from going to chapel. But they had... the Welsh was taught in school. They started their own Welsh school. And then Buenos Aires said, no, you can have Welsh in the afternoon, Spanish in the morning. And then you can have Welsh at 4 o'clock when we finish school. So they used to have their own classes in Welsh. So gradually, Spanish took over. And this antagonized them a lot. A lot of them left. But you see, there's no such thing as a free lunch, is there? You know, I mean, the Argentine government were helping them out all the time. Well, of course, they had to integrate. But that was the reason, I suppose, why the emphasis on the Welsh element there was fortified, really, strengthened. You know, we're going to keep it. We're going to keep our own little bits, but we will integrate, but we're keeping our own bits as well.
And you dramatise the conflict over religion and David's reaction to it.
Yes.
If we could hear.
Yes, I
Richard.
did.
Yes.
All yours, Richard.
It's Rawson, is it? That's how you pronounce it.
Well, I think they say Rawson. I think they say Rawson, but Rawson is the anglicised version of it.
How do you want me to say that? Rawson or Rawson?
You can say it what you like, love. It's all right.
Good.
You know I'm paying you afterwards. So
You? Okay. I'm going to say Rawson then.
Huh?
What do you want me to say? So I say Rawson? Rawson.
Rawson, yeah.
Rawson.
What you like.
Oh dear. Where's the end? Let me find the end first.
Got the wrong book.
No, no. Here we were. Okay. Do you want to say this is about the flood first? This comes out of the flood, or should I just read it?
Oh, yeah. Well, the floods.
Yes, go on then.
Yes, well, the floods. They had terrible, terrible flooding there. I mean, the river Chubut just flooded. And they kept losing their crop. Buenos Aires helped them out. They felt guilty about it because they wanted to be self-supporting. And then finally, they have a wonderful crop of wheat, and then the biggest flood of all. And it was devastating.
The river was throwing torrents of water over the lower slopes of Rawson and was already into the houses. Within an hour, tables, chairs, settles were floating out to sea, while frantic householders salvaged the deepest drawers, tin baths, the biggest they could find to put people into, using broom handles as oars to take them to safety on higher slopes. David, Mavano, and Bethan, with only minutes to spare, grabbed whatever was precious and essential, pushing papers, David's diary, and family mementos into an old leather case. They ran upstairs as water forced its way into the kitchen and swept mercilessly through into the parlor, pushing open the front door with wanton fury like an army of occupation, taking everything that stood in its way, only to abandon it whenever it pleased. They watched helplessly from the comparative safety of the bedroom as their furniture was smashed against walls or submerged in the deepening water. Tears rolled down Mavano's cheeks. Why, Dav? Why? David opened the window. Come on, there's no time. No time to think of reasons. It doesn't matter. Anything here we can use as a raft. This big drawer, it's oak, it'll float away. Mavano pulled at the drawer in the old cupboard they had just brought with them. Bethan cried as her mother helped her over the sill to David, who stood precariously below them in the oak drawer, rising with the swell. Don't be afraid, Carrier. It's going to be all right, he whispered in her ear. They had no need for oars. The force of the water propelled them along. David grabbed a passing tree branch that he used to steer a safer route through the vegetation and half-submerged houses to a distant hillock that still stood as an island of safety above the raging torrents. While they would be safe on this mound, the hazards en route were frightening. The river swirled angrily about these makeshift lifeboats, hurling them and their terrified occupants into bushes and foliage that lay in wait unseen below the surface. Large families had to arrange a shuttle service, hoisting older children into the top branches of tall trees to wait while they took the younger ones off to safety. Thomas and Angharad made their escape in a tin bath. Herbie and Idwal, his brother, collected Lisa and Bron in 2 coracles they had made just months ago, just for the fun of it. Hugh found a tin bath for his mother and Ellen, while he made a raft out of the dresser drawer. Men were frantically hacking the shafts off their carts to turn them into rowing boats. Though the rain was abating, the river engulfed more houses, and acres of another precious wheat crop disappeared forever. Those living higher up were able to wade through the torrents, carrying children and babies. Blood had been at a confinement with a doctor when water began pounding open the front door, carrying most of the furniture away. The mother and her newborn were lifted into a tin bath and floated to higher ground. To add to this combined misery, the rain began to fall again, this time with renewed force, not in drops, but in buckets. So far as anyone could tell, families were accounted for. They had lost their possessions, but it seemed that through prompt action, the river had claimed no lives. A number of children had been injured, for fragile limbs stood little chance between the force of swirling water and the hard bark of the tree. On the hill, still well above the flood line, men, old and young, rigged up tent covers out of sheets or anything they could find for shelter. Those who could remember reminisced about the Mimosa landing and the beach caves all those years ago. Remarkably, Will Fiddler had rescued his fiddle. It's my favorite bit. They tried, but how could they alleviate the mood of utter despondency that could be read in the eyes of every man, woman, and child? Groups clung together, weeping silently for homes that had already taken years of toil and hardship to build, but which were now no more. Once again, they had nothing. David and the other members of the Senate walked about, talking to the forlorn, soaked, shivering groups, trying to give them comfort, as much for themselves as anyone else. As soon as the water goes down, we'll have our houses, most of us, wet, but nobody's afraid of hard work here, and we'll all pitch in to get everybody on their feet again. Aye, but what about my savings, Dav? Said one weeping elderly woman. All in a box they were under the stairs. How do you know it still isn't there? Did you see it float out? No. Well, no crying till you know for sure. Come on, Bach, dry your eyes. Rowson, its surrounding homesteads and fields, had all but disappeared, engulfed by relentless torrents of water. On the hill, they sat close together, uttering few words. No one had the energy, nor the hoil, to say very much. Rain was still falling, but everyone on that hilltop was by now under some sort of awning. The reverend rose to announce a service. Movanoi knew this would be like a red rag to a bull. She watched David's face set, his body stiffen. Tugging at his sleeve, "Leave it be, Dav," she whispered. "Please." The reverend, who had been rescued by neighbors, without whom he and his wife would probably have perished, as he could do very little for himself, raised his lily-white hands to the heavens. "O God, our Father in heaven, we, thy children, implore and beseech you to forgive us our terrible sins and transgressions that have caused you, in your infinite wisdom, to pour down your wrath upon us as our just and deserved punishment." David stood up and walked outside the awnings in the rain, slowly towards the reverend gentleman. Movanoi sat transfixed. Lisa, nearby, moved and sat beside her mother. David, his wet hair raining, his rain trickling down his face, approached the Reverend Jenkins, who was about to kneel on someone's coat, but stopped, raising his eyebrows in inquiry when he saw David coming. "Could you please list our sins, Reverend Jenkins, and yours too, of course, so we know how to avoid another disaster?" There was total silence, apart from the sharp intake of breath. Some were horrified at David Rees's effrontery in challenging the man of God. But many, though afraid to admit it openly, were more than sympathetic to his question. Regaining his shaken composure, the Reverend replied, "It is up to the Almighty to decide the punishment sinners like us deserve." Looking at his ever-obedient flock, he cleverly enlisted their support with an Amen. Do you not think it is to do with weather conditions over the mountains? The rising clouds, the winds, the continuing rain? The world is all God's work, Mr. Rees. Nature obeys his commands. So everything good and bad, then, is all God's work. Do not doubt God. God knows everything that goes on. He knows. So when our children die and our sons and friends are murdered, that is God's work. Everything is God's work. David's anger was rising. And I put it to you, Reverend Jenkins, that we have a mighty, cruel, and unpleasant God who seems hell-bent upon our destruction. There were audible sounds of shock from the crowd. As ye sow, so shall ye reap, Mr. Rees. Read your Bible and you will receive the word of the Lord. So what Bible did the native Indians read when they murdered our 2 boys? They are ignorant heathens, but put here on this earth just like us by God. Surely, according to your teachings, it is only belief in the Almighty and his Son that makes us into sober, God-fearing human beings. So is that the key to our survival, Reverend Jenkins? Through the word of God, we survive. Gorillas and apes survive too. And they have no idea about the word of God, have they? And do you know, Reverend Jenkins, they help each other, give comfort to each other, protect each other, just as we are doing now. And they don't have a Bible. They don't have a religion. They have a natural instinct to survive, just like us. And what's more, they do not live under the threat of some terrible retribution from a cruel God that, according to you, only sees our sins, our wickedness, and never the things we all do in our community to help each other, to give comfort and strength and love. That word, Reverend Jenkins, is sadly missing from your prayers. Love. The Reverend opened his mouth to speak, but David drove on. According to you and your kind, the sins of our fathers are visited upon us. Therefore, that old man with a long white beard in the sky will take from us whatever and whoever we hold close to us as atonement for his sins. Call that a just God, he shouted. Must I believe that God took away the lives of Michael and Sean because of some sins their fathers had committed? No. It was the fault of the army and the government and failure to negotiate proper terms with the natural inhabitants of this land. Must I believe that God took away my child on board ship all those years ago because of some sins I or my father had committed? No. It was a severe medical condition my little one contracted, brought about by seasickness. He paused, his eyes full with memory. I will never believe that it is our sins that have caused this catastrophe. I will never believe in your God of vengeance and hate and cruelty. I want to believe in a God of love who loves us for what we are and forgives us for what we are. If that is not to be, then I shall go back to the old religion of Wales, of the Druids, where Mother Nature ruled and the wonders of the sky, the sun, the moon, wind and rain, the seasons, the good earth, the promise of springtime and harvest, where birth, death and love were as natural to every man, woman and child as drawing breath. David stood quite still, tears mingling with the rain running down his cheeks. His shoulders sagged, exhausted from this verbal attack that had been festering within him for years.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
My eyes move too fast, my mouth. I go again.
Take 2.
Do the audio book for us. So, Elizabeth, my last question is about that relationship between what you call the native inhabitants of the land and the Argentinians and the Welsh. They found themselves right in the middle. How did it work?
Yeah, well, it was a purging, really. It was, well, they just wanted to get rid of the Indians. Mind you, some of the Indians, the Tehuelches were great, but some of the Araucans were a pretty nasty lot. They were probably terribly nice to each other, but they didn't like anyone else coming in. Well, I can understand that, but they were pretty bloodthirsty to each other, to other tribes anyway, because there were lots and lots of Indian tribes. And the government decided to clear the land. You see, they wanted to go further west towards the Andes, towards Chile. They wanted to make way. They built a road there finally and built a railway. But at that point, they wanted to clear the way of the Indian tribes. And they did it in not the best possible way, because is there a good way of doing that to the indigenous inhabitants? They burnt villages. And there was quite a lot of slaughter going on as well. And so the Welsh who did actually go west often became the victims of the reprisals, of the Indian reprisals. So you see, nobody wins in the end. What they didn't do is discuss it. They didn't have a political outcome, and we're saying that all the time in our own lives, aren't we? No political outcome. They didn't discuss it. They didn't talk about it, and they should have done, because it would have been easy then to negotiate. Like I said, it's our Wild West. It's completely Wales's Wild West. But they finally, the Indians, really, the tribes disappeared. The Tehuelches, I've read that they, I think most of them died off because they had, they caught measles or something like that. It was a Western-type disease or whatever that they'd not been used. They had no antibodies at all, nothing, and they caught it and they died. They died off.
So the survival of the Welsh population was partly due to the moves of the Argentinian government against the Indians, but also partly to the extraordinary ability of the Welsh to hang on.
Oh, yes, they did. Yes, they were very tenacious, very tenacious. I think they're extremely brave people, you know, and they, well, I think they're as good. They're the pioneers. They were our pioneers, you know, and they did it. They did it. I think that they were always grateful to the Tehuelches for helping them, showing them what to do, right, you know. They couldn't really have survived without the Tehuelches helping them either. No, that was... The Argentinian government left them to themselves. Would they have survived without help with the Indians? I don't know. I doubt it. I doubt it. Not as well, anyway.
Thank you very much indeed. I want to open it to the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, do you have any questions for Elizabeth or Richard? Yes, I can see one over there.
Okay. That was great.
I'm waiting for her to finish speaking. Hello. My knowledge of the whole Patagonia thing has been very limited until now, and I just wondered, how on earth did the Welsh Emigration Society and the Argentinians get together? It seems a sort of, how would the Argentinians have known that the Welsh might be ready to move, or was it something that was, I was just confused. It seems a sort of fairly remote and obscure place to go, and I just wondered how it all came about.
Well, I mean, you know, it was the only place really where the Welsh were offered, as we were talking about, you know, autonomy. And I mean, you know, it was very tempting, and to be offered 100 acres per family was fantastic. The other experiments that they tried had become integrated into the greater land very quickly. They tried America. They tried, I think mostly it was America. The British government wanted them to go to South Africa as well, to take them away from Patagonia. But you know, why were they going there? They were going there to be a bulwark against the Boers, who were getting a bit cheeky. So that Patagonia was great. Their own land, their own government, you see. That was why. Is that what you were going to say? Is that what you wanted?
Thank you. There's one over here.
Raymond Harris. Without seeking to pigeonhole in any way the breadth of vision in your work, would you like to say something about the genre of making history live in the form of social geography?
Yes. I think that I like the genre of historical fiction because it is up to the author to actually extrapolate the salient points in that particular history. And so it is a matter of personal choice, really, for the author. But, you know, you have to try and be honest and take out the bits that really do form the history, the skeleton. You've got the bones of history there. You must have the bones of history. And, you know, if you have to use your imagination a little bit, but based on fact, to create the characters that inhabit that place. And I think that historical fiction, if it's as much history as fiction, that's important, actually does bring the past to life so much more clearly. One can understand, one can sympathize. Thank you.
Yes.
I've thoroughly enjoyed the event so far. What I've been thinking is that as you are an actress, you are used to inhabiting other people, other worlds. And I would have thought there was a great contribution then to moving into writing novels. You've experienced what it is to be other people in all kinds of situations. So you've got the empathy, which then, obviously with a talent for writing, but it goes into being a novelist.
Well, I suppose so, but it's interesting you should say that, but it's more the fact that I've written so many plays. I think that's what as well as being, you know, that makes me live these characters, because they're real to me. You know, I write them and they're real. Well, not always, it doesn't always work out. Of course, you try every time. Every time it's different, but you try and inhabit the character. That's it, you know. And I think probably it does help being an actor and you know, a writer, a playwright. I mean, yes.
Gentleman there.
How are you getting on, Rich?
Huh? Sorry, I can't.
Jeff Fleischer?
Sorry, Jeff Fleischer. Hello. Oh, how's Laurie doing?
Nice to see you again.
Yes.
See you for a bit.
I used to run through his gardens as a child. Oh, nice.
Never mind history. What do you think the future is for the Welsh in Patagonia?
Pardon?
The future for the Welsh in Patagonia.
Well, I don't know. I'm dying for somebody to give me the money to go there. You know. Yes, please.
I think she's the future of Patagonia.
Yeah. No, I think they're doing very well. I mean, if I can get there in November, I'll tell you. They've got nice Steddfod in November. I hope I go to it, but I'll let you know. But I think they're doing very well. And, you know, what is good is that the Argentine embassy is very, very proactive in this, particularly this year. And they are promoting the Patagonian Welsh relationship very, very much. They're promoting it. And I think that's important, to build bridges. We have to, after that silly Falklands thing. We won't talk about that. But there is a corollary in the book. There is a reference to it. I won't tell you now, just in case you buy the book. But it's in the back. And never mind. But you'll see, all is well at the end of the day. It's all right. No feathers are ruffled. No, I think they're doing very well.
We've got time for one last one here.
One question.
I think I can assure you about the tenacity of the Welsh in Patagonia. I was in Port Madryn in Patagonia 10 years ago, and there was a very strong Welsh community just in the hinterland, and we heard a very good Welsh choir, and Welsh people seemed to be doing very well. They were obviously Argentinians, but they had a strong feeling for their ancestry and their language and their original homeland. So there is still a strong streak of it there.
Yes, but and they beat us in rugby too. When the rugby team was, yeah.
All else as well.
Don't like that, but I mean, they did it.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your time and attention. I'd like to thank our guests, obviously our stars, and recommend that you go to the bookshop and purchase this excellent book, which you will now be able to hear read to you in the voice of Richard Harrington. So thank you very much, and thank Elizabeth and Richard.
Thank you.
See myself in black and white. It isn't done, it isn't right. See it there before my eyes. It's a sorry song, a sorry sight. You sunk your teeth, you're in me deep. I couldn't sing, I couldn't sleep. Beat your chest with both your hands for all I was, for all I had.